David Mitchell, 38 years old, has dedicated 15 years of his life as a firefighter at the Athens Fire Department in southeastern Ohio. His station is situated just off East State Street, only minutes from the Hocking River and less than 10 minutes from Route 33. From there, he protects the areas of Athens, the Plains, Nelsonville, and a vast stretch of desolate rural roads that snake deep into the Wayne National Forest. Some of his shifts pass with monotonous medical calls, tending to patients with chest pains, drug overdoses, or simple lift assists. On other nights, the calls are for structure fires, overturned vehicles, and barns engulfed in flames in the middle of fields where not a single fire hydrant exists within a half-mile radius. Yet, what transformed Day? Seasoned veteran of life and death into a broken man, someone who now trembles while locking every door and never dares to turn off the lights at 3 in the morning, was not the heat of the fire. It was the anomalous, malevolent entities that silently wait within the heart of those tragedies. This is who I am now, or rather, the tattered shell of what is left of me. I sit huddled in the corner of my silent apartment, where flickering neon lights cast shadows through the closed blinds, surrounded by half-finished cups of coffee and the weight of dark circles under my eyes. I record these lines, recounting these dark secrets not for sympathy, but out of a desperate attempt to purge my mind of the madness that threatens to consume me every second. For years, I believed that fire, no matter how aggressive, followed certain rules that we could control. But how do you fight the absurdity of evil things that do not exist according to any known law of physics? Before everything snapped and shattered into an eternal nightmare, our fire engine company 3 was a tight-knit family, operating with incredible synchronization in a normal world. Our captain, Tom Vance, was a man of few words but possessed an astounding sharpness, always keeping a cool head in the most perilous situations. Beside him was Sarah Jenkins, a brave warrior who always took the lead with the nozzle during dangerous entries into the sea of flames. I cannot forget Marcus Thorne, our calm medical technician, who always reached out to pull victims back from the brink of death with an unnerving steadiness. We stood shoulder to shoulder, trusting one another implicitly in a world where the only threats were smoke and fire, until we stepped into a fracture in reality where traps from beyond this world began to hunt us one by one. The cracks began to form on a night that seemed like any other, when the alarm bell shrieked through the silence at exactly 2:14 in the morning, sending us rushing to a 2-story house on Chestnut Street where an elderly man was reportedly trapped. En route, Captain Tom Vance quickly analyzed the rustic architecture of the old houses in that area and mapped out our initial attack strategy. The night sky was eerily still, and as the truck came to a halt, red tongues of fire were already licking out of the upstairs windows, though the ground floor remained swathed in darkness. Receiving the order to enter, Sarah Jenkins and I worked together to breach the front door. The moment we crossed the threshold, the temperature spiked against our faces, but strangely, the aggressive fire seemed concentrated only on the second floor. With our vision choked by thick, swirling black smoke, we hugged the walls, our heavy footsteps echoing rhythmically on the narrow wooden stairs as we began a careful search of every smoke-filled room. After clearing several empty rooms, we reached the end of a narrow hallway and pushed open the door to a small, dark room. The fire had not yet reached this space, but it radiated an unnatural, sweltering heat that made the skin beneath our protective gear crawl. Sweeping my flashlight through the thin smoke, I froze when I discovered a closet door against the wall that was pulsating with an intense heat, as if it were a glowing incinerator. Driven by a nagging, uneasy instinct, I reached out with my heavy gloved hand and slowly swung the door open. I witnessed a sight so horrific that the blood in my veins seemed to turn to ice. Before me stood a man, motionless in that cramped space, his clothes untouched by fire or soot, his eyes wide and staring straight through my soul. For a split second, I thought I had found a survivor, but before I could call out to Sarah, the entity's right arm swung up with supernatural speed and gripped my wrist with terrifying force. In that instant, his flesh began to bubble and blister, roasting into a deep black from within the very marrow of his bones. He leaned forward, his parched, cracked lips murmuring in a voice that echoed as if from the grave, saying that we had not left. Then, his grip loosened, and his entire body collapsed onto the floor into a pile of black ash, without a single bone or human structure remaining. Absolute panic seized me, my heart hammering against my ribs as I stumbled back. The heat from the ash flared up so violently that Sarah had to scream and use all her strength to drag me out of that haunted room before the real fire swallowed the hallway. We retreated into the cold night air, gasping for breath, but as I tremblingly removed my heavy gear, I was paralyzed to find a red burn in the shape of 5 fingers seared into my wrist, even though my specialized heat-resistant glove was completely intact at that absolute confusion gnawed at my mind until a few days later, when I secretly reviewed the fire report and the architectural blueprints of the house, only to realize the wall where I had seen that entity was actually an exterior load-bearing wall. According to the basic laws of physics, there was absolutely no space behind those bricks to build such a closet. It never existed, and the man could not have been there, yet the stinging pain from the finger-shaped burn on my skin remained, a cold reminder that what touched me was an entity from a malevolent dimension that did not belong in this world. It was only the beginning of a sequence of events that would completely tear apart my perception of reality, that the nightmare from the Nelsonville fire had barely begun to fade when another horror struck on a bone-chilling winter night. The station sirens wailed again, tearing through the stillness, directing us to a dark, winding mountain pass on the lonely stretch of Route 33. We received an urgent report of a serious rollover accident, and when Company 3 arrived, a deathly silence hung over the scene. A silver sedan lay overturned, completely mangled after tumbling across the frost-covered asphalt. Inside the crushed metal was a young man around 25 years old, pinned between the driver's seat and the steering wheel. His body was shattered, blood streamed from his forehead to his chin, and his breath was nothing more than a faint, agonized wheeze. Sarah and I rushed over with heavy hydraulic rescue tools, carefully cutting through the jagged metal that gripped the victim, while Marcus Thorne stayed by his side with his medical bag, trying to stabilize the boy's plummeting vitals. The tension was suffocating, punctuated by the screeching roar of the metal cutters, but what sent a shiver down my spine was not the carnage. It was the moment I leaned into the car to help Marcus pull the boy out that the victim's eyes were wide and glazed, filled with a terror that went far beyond physical pain. He gripped my coat with his last bit of strength and wheezed that there was someone standing in the middle of the road, someone who just stood there in the darkness and would not move even as the car sped toward them. Those dying words echoed in my head like a funeral knell. As Marcus and the paramedics rushed the victim into the ambulance, I stepped back onto the glass-strewn road and happened to look up at the concrete overpass spanning the highway. My heart skipped a beat, as there, silhouetted against the pitch-black sky, was a dark figure standing perfectly still. Its arms hung lifelessly at its sides, and it stared down at the accident with a posture that made my skin crawl. The freezing chill raced down my spine as I frantically pointed toward the bridge and shouted for the police officer nearby to shine his flashlight up there. The sharp white beam swept across the rusted steel railing, but it was empty. There was no one watching, no car parked on the shoulder above. That bizarre shadow had vanished into the void as quickly as it appeared that the unfortunate young man did not survive the trip to the hospital, leaving a knot of unease in my chest that would not unravel. So early the next morning, I used the excuse of assisting with the investigation to visit the local police station, begging to see the footage from the dashcam recovered from the wreckage. The police chief hesitated but eventually opened a video on his laptop. We both held our breath as we watched the car traveling at a steady speed when the headlights suddenly illuminated a black human silhouette standing dead center in the lane for exactly 3 short frames. There were no reflective clothes, no facial features, and no clear body details. It was just a solid black mass in the shape of a person that appeared for a fraction of a second before the driver swerved in total panic, lost control, and flipped. I felt cold all over and was about to ask him to rewind the tape window. Chief abruptly slammed the laptop shut with an air of confusion and hidden fear. The very next day, when I tried to contact them again to get a copy of that video, the police informed me in a very vague and definitive manner that the original data file had been severely corrupted during backup and was unrecoverable. That strange incident was forced into the shadows of my memory until a few weeks later, during a patrol to assist a broken-down car near that same spot. Unable to suppress the obsession simmering in my mind, I decided to climb the grassy slope toward that haunted overpass to see for myself. Walking along the cold steel railing covered in night dew, I stopped and stared at the gray metal when I found a mark that made the hair on my body stand on end. At the exact spot where that black shadow had stood watching the accident, there were soot stains burned deep into the steel in the shape of 2 twisted bare feet. The winter wind howled around me, but I broke into a cold sweat because I knew this was no graffiti. It looked like the mark of something carrying the temperature of hell, something that had stood there long enough to bake the metal. From the moment I saw those 2 impossible burn marks, my mind officially fractured into a state of irreparable paranoia. I developed severe obsessive-compulsive tendencies, torturing myself with an inexplicable dread. Now, whenever I go out on a night call, I wear a personal camera I bought online strapped to my chest, and I can never stop my eyes from scanning every overpass, terrified that I will see that malevolent human shape standing above, waiting to collect the souls of the doomed. The obsession with the shadow on the bridge had not yet released its grip when the silent forest opened its dark mouth to swallow the last of my fragile sanity at 1:26 in the morning, following an emergency call from a lost hiker reporting a mysterious column of smoke rising from the deep core of the Wayne National Forest. Our massive engine 3 turned off the smooth asphalt and jolted violently down a dirt road filled with roots and sharp stones, heading into the domain of thick darkness. When the engine was cut, an unnatural silence fell over us. There was no chirping of night insects, no rustling of leaves, only the sight of a dilapidated log cabin with a trail of gray smoke drifting from a cracked brick chimney, yet not a single spark of light or warmth from fire escaped its black windows. Under the cautious command of Captain Tom Vance, Sarah and I carried our heavy tools to the sagging front door and forced it open. Inside, we were met by a scene that was bizarre to the point of being bone-chilling. The house was unnaturally clean, without a single speck of dust or a cobweb on the rafters. In the center of the living room, 3 old wooden chairs were arranged in a perfect arc, facing a fireplace that was cold and dead as if someone had just been sitting there waiting for us. Marcus Thorne swept his flashlight across the floor and discovered a section of wood that looked newer than the rest. Hidden beneath a layer of camouflage dust was a plywood trapdoor secured by a shiny new steel padlock that looked absurdly out of place in such a rot-filled setting. A sense of dread coiled in my stomach, but Captain Vance insisted on following safety protocols to clear the scene. He ordered me to use the bolt cutters to snap the lock so we could check the space below. As the trapdoor was lifted, a blast of air as cold as a corpse's breath blew up from the basement, carrying the scent of damp earth and something sweet and decaying. One by one, we descended the steep, creaking wooden stairs into a dark, bone-chilling earthen cellar. At the very center of the dirt floor was a scorched circle about a meter wide, where the earth had been baked hard like ceramic, yet there was no wood, coal, or ash left behind. My flashlight beam accidentally swept toward a dark corner and froze on a solitary object lying against the dirt wall, a faded yellow firefighter's helmet of an old design with no modern reflective tape. My legs felt like lead as I slowly walked over to pick it up. The leather lining was dry and crumbled under my fingers, but the name on the front metal plate was still clearly legible. My throat tightened and a cold sweat soaked my shirt because I recognized the name immediately. It belonged to Bill Kinsley, a fellow firefighter from our county who had vanished without a trace in this very forest in 1998. His body had never been found, and at that horrific moment, our shoulder-mounted radio simultaneously erupted in a deafening static and then went completely dead, cutting off all signals to dispatch despite the full bars showing on the screens. Survival instinct flared in Tom Van Cess' mind, and he roared for the team to retreat upstairs immediately. We frantically scrambled up the vibrating wooden stairs, and just as the last boot hit the living room floor, a sharp, metallic snap echoed from the stone walls. From the empty void of the fireplace, a furious orange flame suddenly exploded like a hungry beast being awakened. It sent out massive tongues that swallowed the 3 wooden chairs in the blink of an eye and incinerated the walls with a speed that defied every physical law of fire spread. The team struggled to burst through the door into the cold night air, collapsing onto the damp grass just seconds before the hellish fire consumed the cabin and brought the tin roof crashing down within a mere 15 minutes. We stood there, helpless and stunned, watching the fire burn savagely until dawn, and that was when the final blow shattered my remaining sanity. When we moved in to sift through the ash and clear the scene at sunrise, we were shocked to find that beneath the charred floor was only solid, undisturbed earth. There was no trapdoor, no wooden stairs, no cold cellar, and the missing firefighter's helmet had evaporated without a trace. It had created a perfect illusion, a psychological spatial trap to lure us in, making me realize we were being hunted by a malevolent entity capable of bending space and reality, breaking a large piece of my mind forever and pulling me deeper into an endless black hole of paranoia. The horror in the forest had carved an irreparable void in my mind, but the final mission that truly demolished my fragile reason and pushed me permanently over the edge of madness occurred on a gloomy night at an abandoned brick warehouse along the Hocking River, where Captain Tom Vance deployed our forces to block all access from the main road after reports of black smoke rising from the dilapidated roof. He ordered a careful search of the interior for homeless individuals who might be seeking shelter from the cold. Sarah Jenkins and I were assigned to scout the dark eastern section of the cavernous warehouse. When we pried open the rusted iron rolling door and ducked inside, a thick fog of gray smoke immediately surrounded us. Lingering in the cold air was not just the smell of moldy wood, but a nauseating stench of synthetic plastic mixed with the metallic tang of burnt raw meat. The flickering lights on our helmets struggled to penetrate the dense mist, gliding over stagnant puddles that reflected a ghostly light on the cracked concrete floor. As we moved deeper into the eastern wing, the air became suffocating and terrifyingly still, until my flashlight beam swept across a vast wall and stopped at a sight that made my stomach churn with horror. On the weathered brick wall before us were hundreds, thousands of black handprints seared into the rough surface. Those haunting marks came in every shape and size, from large, coarse adult hands to tiny, delicate children's hands. All were sharply defined in an unnatural way, with no smudges to suggest movement on the vertical plane. The most chilling and wrong part was that all those thousands of silent handprints were reaching toward a single central point, as if a massive invisible crowd was desperately clawing at the bricks to dig an escape route. I bit my lip and stepped closer, trembling as I removed one glove and pressed my bare palm against a rare empty space between the marks. I immediately recoiled as I felt a sweltering heat radiating from deep within the core of the bricks, rather than from any external fire. At the moment my heart skipped a beat at that impossibility, a piercing sound tore through the air, echoing off the cold brick walls. It was the man-down alarm from Sarah Jenkins' safety device, A machine that only screams when it detects a firefighter has remained motionless for more than 30 seconds. I spun around in a panic and saw Sarah standing frozen just a few feet from that twisted wall. Her arms hung lifelessly like a marionette with cut strings, her eyes wide and vacant, staring fixedly at the focal point of those black handprints that I screamed her name over and over, trying to drown out the shrieking alarm, but she did not react at all, as if her entire soul had been sucked into the malevolent void behind the thick bricks. At the same time, from within the core of the bricks at the center of the wall, tiny cracks began to spread, glowing with a brilliant red light like molten lava boiling beneath the earth. The surrounding air suddenly became scorching, and through my oxygen mask, I heard Sarah's parched lips whisper in a hollow, emotionless voice that they were in there, and they were calling her name. The heat from the wall flared up, distorting the space around it. I knew that if I did not act decisively, we would both be buried in this impossible hell. Using the last of my panic strength born of pure survival instinct, I abandoned all safety protocols, lunged forward, grabbed Sarah's collar, and yanked her backward with such violence that the Velcro straps tore. The instant her heels were dragged from their original spot, the massive brick wall suddenly buckled like a giant creature taking a breath and then collapsed inward into a hollow gut. It released a furious sea of flames erupting from the void, swallowing the entire eastern wing of the warehouse. The brutal pressure of the fire threw us both dozens of meters across the concrete. I frantically scrambled up, threw Sarah's limp body over my shoulder, and ran through the rubble to escape the collapsing structure. The roar of the fire behind us sounded like thousands of voices screaming in rage because their prey had slipped away. A few days after the tragedy had passed and been forgotten by the media, the city sent heavy excavators to level the remains of the warehouse for safety, but unable to resist the madness gnawing at my heart, I secretly crossed the rusted security fence at night to frantically dig through the debris at the exact spot where the eastern wall had collapsed. Under the pale, cold moonlight, I used my bare, bloody hands to inspect each brick, and then I collapsed, sobbing in a total breakdown of reason. Every shattered brick was perfectly clean, lacking a single soot stain, cracks caused by high heat, or absolutely any sign that a single ghostly handprint had ever existed on their surfaces. That ultimate absurdity officially killed the brave David Mitchell of old. No one in the fire department believed my insane story, and Sarah herself had completely collapsed under the weight of the psychological trauma. She filed for a transfer to a small station in a distant city the very next week and quietly cut off all contact with everyone she had served with. After her departure and that night of digging through those innocent white bricks by the Hawking River, the final limit of my endurance snapped. I filed for early retirement at 38, ending 15 years of service to the Athens Fire Department with a medical record citing extremely severe post-traumatic stress disorder. Captain Tom Vance and Marcus Thorne visited me a few times, bringing sincere encouragement and worried looks, but they will never understand that what destroyed me was not the memory of victims in fire or bloody accidents on Route 33. What gnaws at my soul day and night is the horrific realization that the reality we live in is incredibly thin and full of dark fractures. Now, sitting alone within the four walls of my empty apartment at dawn, I realize I can no longer see the world in a normal way. To a normal person, the rolling hills of rural Ohio look peaceful by day, and the tree-lined roads through quiet towns provide a sense of security, but I know what is lurking beneath that deceptive shell. I have crawled through smoke-filled hallways in Nelsonville where space was bent to create an extra room. I have stared at an invisible black shadow on a bridge railing. I have stepped into an illusory cellar in the Wayne National Forest where daylight cannot reach. And I have witnessed a brick wall generate the heat of hell while thousands of black handprints long to pull us into death. Those things have left me with a profound paranoia, a mad vigilance toward every physical structure around me. I lock every door with multiple heavy metal locks. I have installed high-power lighting in every corner, and I never dare to sleep when darkness falls. But even so, whenever the clock strikes 3 in the morning, I stare with bloodshot eyes at the flat drywall of my own bedroom, listening to the faint creaks of the wooden beams expanding, wondering if it is just the natural sound of the materials or the footsteps of something lurking in the void between the walls. Sometimes, in a state of total panic, I swear I can feel a blast of heat coming from the cold wallpaper and hear whispers calling my name from deep within the foundation. I spent half my life learning to read smoke, to measure heat, to break through obstacles to save lives, but all those skills are useless against entities that do not follow any natural law. They do not need oxygen to survive, they do not show up on advanced thermal cameras, and they never leave physical evidence when the sun rises. Finally, I realized a cruel truth that the solid houses and homes humans build are not actually strongholds protecting us. They are simply giant empty boxes, loosely defined spaces waiting for the physical structures above to weaken so that malevolent anomalies can crawl in and slowly take over. In this seemingly peaceful land of Ohio, even the most aggressive fire has a weakness, as you only need to cut off the oxygen or fuel and it will die under the water from a nozzle. But the filthy evil hiding in the shadows never disappears. They cannot be burned, they cannot be extinguished, and they will always be there, patiently waiting for you just behind the thin wall of reality that I thought fleeing the fire service and locking myself in this solitary fortress would bring some fake peace. But the harsh reality proved otherwise at exactly 3:45 yesterday morning, showing my mad vigilance and excessive security were not unfounded paranoia. As I slumped over a cold cup of coffee with bloodshot eyes, I noticed a subtle but horrific change in the air of my sealed apartment. A very familiar scent carrying the breath of death floated around my nose, a sickening mix of burnt plastic, the smell of roasted meat from the warehouse, and the damp, sweet rot of the forest cellar. Immediately after, the high-power lighting I had installed began to flicker wildly, letting out ear-piercing electrical crackles before they all went dark, plunging everything into a thick, heavy darkness that made it impossible to breathe. Through the dim blue glow of the infrared security camera connected to my laptop, I froze, my body turning to stone as I saw a black shadow standing motionless in the middle of my living room. Its posture, with arms hanging lifelessly and head slightly bowed, was identical to the deathly shadow on the Route 33 overpass. My heart pounded as if to tear through my chest. I scrambled for the tactical flashlight on the table, my hands shaking as I pressed the button and shone a blinding white beam through the bedroom door to dispel the evil. Yet, the physical world before me was empty, while on the monitor, that malevolent shadow was still standing there. It slowly raised a face with no features to look directly into the lens and then began to glide toward my bedroom door. In that moment, the temperature in my closed room began to spike. Cold sweat soaked my back as I heard a sharp, creaking crack come from the drywall right next to my bed. The gray wallpaper began to bubble and scorch at the edges, shriveling with terrifying speed to reveal cracks glowing with a brilliant red light like molten lava. And then, the most horrific thing happened, a scorched handprint slowly pressed against the flat wall. It was not being printed from the outside, but was being pushed from within the empty wall by a demonic force, accompanied by the echo of a parched, familiar voice from the closet in Nelsonville whispering in my ear that we did not leave. I scrambled back, falling onto the wooden floor, dragging my heavy body until my back hit the window that was locked with 3 layers of steel bolts. My mind cleared in a moment of utter despair as I realized a cruel truth that all these locks and reinforced doors were not keeping things out, they were locking me inside a cage with them. Throughout 15 years of entering the most aggressive seas of fire, I believed I was the one tasked with saving people from fiery traps, but at this final moment, I bitterly understood that I was the prey they had marked long ago, that the fractures in reality did not let me go when I retired. They followed my boots home and waited patiently in the empty walls until my spirit was at its weakest to finally tear away the spatial shell and claim this empty box called a home. I tried to gather my last bit of strength to record these desperate words for the vast internet, while right now, a second wall has begun to bubble and reveal more black handprints ready to tear through the drywall. The heat of the hellish fire is already scorching my face and singing my hair, but there is absolutely no physical fire for me to extinguish. There is no escape, no chance to call my old teammates. I can only leave this warning in blood and tears for anyone who might listen. If on a quiet night you suddenly hear the walls of your house cracking for no reason and feel a sweltering heat coming from the darkness, please never try to explain it through science. Abandon everything, throw open the doors, and run immediately before the structure of reality around you is swallowed whole. As soon as I hit send on that final message, the entire drywall before me shattered into small pieces, but strangely, it made no sound, leaving a deafening silence filled the space where a thick mist of ash-colored smoke emerged from the black hole, carrying the sweltering heat of a closed incinerator and the smell of decades of sweet rot. Scorched, mangled hands oozing a glowing liquid reached out of the darkness and grabbed my ankles with an irresistible force. I struggled frantically, clawing at the wooden floor until my fingernails bled, but it was useless. That brutal force dragged my body across the boundary of the normal physical world and into the empty wall. When my body was swallowed by the darkness and heat, the drywall behind me immediately closed perfectly, without a flaw, imprisoning me in an eternal anomalous dimension. Contrary to the cramped space I imagined, where I fell was a vast, terrifying void, a tunnel of twisted architectural structures that did not follow any human geometric rules. I drifted in a zero-gravity space thick with the smell of scorched earth, passing by floating illusory ruins of places I had been. I saw the rusted railing of the Route 33 overpass, the plywood trapdoor from the forest cellar, and the thousands of handprints on an infinite brick wall. In that pit of despair, I realized I was not alone. Around me, faintly visible in the gray smoke, were dozens of shadows floating motionless like statues forgotten by time. I looked around in a panic and recognized the mangled face of the young man from the winter accident, and the roasted body of the man from the Nelsonville closet. All of them stared at me with wide, vacant eyes. But what truly shattered my soul was when the dim red light of the void illuminated a figure in tattered old firefighter gear, wearing a yellow helmet with no reflective tape. It was Bill Kinsley, the colleague who had vanished in 1998. The skin on Bill's face had shriveled like scorched bark, but his eyes still held a clear awareness, a cruel truth that in this malevolent dimension there is no concept of escape or actual death, only a suffocating torment that lasts for eternity. At that moment, I began to feel the skin on my own body hardening and peeling away into flakes of ash, while a layer of rotted firefighter gear began to form and tighten around me like a second skin. I tried to scream, but my lungs were filled with thick, poisonous smoke that made no sound. I bitterly understood the grim law of these glitched realities, as they always need new sacrifices to fill the empty spaces and maintain the malevolent heat hidden behind the physical partitions. They did not let me escape, not because they wanted to destroy me, but because they wanted to turn me into a part of this endless trapped system. From this moment on, the name David Mitchell is erased from the world of the living. I have become part of the darkness waiting behind the wall. One day in the future, when a young team of brave firefighters rushes into a smoke-filled house in Athens, they will open a closet door in an unnaturally hot room, and I will be there, motionless in a fiery void, reaching out with a bloody hand to grip the wrist of a trembling young soldier and murmuring that same hateful, eternal refrain that you have not left. Time in this dark dimension does not flow according to any physical law I knew as a living man, meaning I cannot count how many seconds or decades have passed since that fateful night. There is only a sweltering heat that never dies and a thick mist of ash that traps every sense. My mind, though broken, is forced to stay awake to feel the grotesque transformation of my body as it merges with the twisted structures of this glitched reality. I float among countless empty rooms stacked like a giant, deformed beehive, each an awaiting trap connected to the real world of rural Ohio. From my perspective as an imprisoned entity, I finally understand the nature of the evil we faced. They are not demons or ghosts, but the tumors of a glitched reality, the cracks of a physical system searching for living beings to fill the gaps. Then, without warning, the thin membrane of space before me vibrated. A blast of cold air carrying the scent of pine smoke from the world of men rushed in, awakening my primal instincts. A yellow flashlight beam pierced the mist and shone directly onto my parched face. Through that narrow spatial window, I saw a flaming hallway and a figure in firefighter gear walking slowly, carrying a heavy oxygen tank with cautious steps. My heart, or rather the deep hole where my chest used to be, tightened when the light revealed the face beneath the mask. It was Marcus Thorne, my old teammate, but his eyes were now deep with the wrinkles of age and exhaustion. I wanted to scream, to warn him to run, but I had no control over my tattered body. The malevolent force here had stripped my will, turning me into a mindless puppet for the hunger of the cosmic glitch. My black, shriveled arm reached out stiffly from the darkness, aiming for Marcus' coat. I screamed inside my own mind, but my shell carried out its dark programming. When my fingers gripped his shoulder, Marcus' eyes went wide with a terror identical to what I felt in Nelsonville. The heat from the void began to melt his gear with a sickening sizzle. Despite the resistance of my soul, my parched lips murmured that cursed phrase that you have not left. The moment the sound hit his ears, the spatial boundary slammed shut, throwing me back into the suffocating darkness. I drifted among illusory walls, gnawing on the agony of realizing I was now the instrument of horror for the brothers I once swore to protect. There is no salvation, only a giant maze of rooms that crave human flesh. I will repeat this monstrous role in countless fractures of time and space, waiting for the next fire engine to tear through the night of the desolate countryside. The torment did not stop with playing the monster in Nelsonville, because as my essence was absorbed into this invisible network, my consciousness was torn into thousands of sharp shards scattered across the timelines of Ohio. I existed simultaneously at all the fractures Engine 3 once faced. In one eternal moment, I felt the winter wind as I stood on the Route 33 overpass, looking down at my past self in the wreckage. My bare feet seared soot into the steel, yet I was powerless to warn myself to run. At the same time, another piece of my soul was groveling in the dirt of the Wayne National Forest cellar, leaving the yellow helmet in the scorched circle and watching Captain Vance and Sarah walk into my trap. The most disgusting blow was seeing myself behind the warehouse bricks, where the thousands of handprints were not a crowd of victims, but infinite shattered versions of me in different timelines, clawing to escape. I tried to call Sarah's name through the bricks, but the signal was bent into a demonic curse that shattered her mind. This deformed time loop proved that the demons we feared were just our future selves, crushed and thrown back to complete a perfect tragedy. I created my own fear and paved the way for my own fall to become the monster in the dark. I gave up all resistance, letting my soul fade into the network of shadows, forever a part of the warped reality lurking behind peaceful walls. That when my awareness was sinking into dormancy, a violent shockwave of heat woke me and threw me into a new flaming space where I was leaking from the rusted steel rafters of an old canning factory north of Athens. I saw Tom Vance moving through the smoke, looking much older and unsteady. He was followed by a pale young rookie, and seeing that Tom had not given up, a desire to protect my old brothers flared up, overriding the evil controlling me. I used my last bit of humanity to control the physical space around a ceiling section that was about to collapse. I wrapped my tentacles of ash and shadow around a red-hot steel beam, pulling it back to stop a concrete slab from crushing Tom and the boy. The fire seemed enraged by my defiance, shrieking as it incinerated my soul structure. The temperature spiked where I hid, bending the space into a bizarre black streak. The rookie looked up and screamed in terror at the giant black figure. Clinging to the ceiling, my glowing fluids dripping like acid. Tom Vance looked up, and through his mask, I saw a terror and despair identical to how he looked when I went mad years ago. He could not see my sacrifice, only a monster waiting to pounce. He ordered the rookie to flee while he drew his axe in a final, desperate defensive stance. I wanted to call out that I was David Mitchell, that I was saving him, but I only let out a demonic shriek that cracked the walls. As Tom jumped out the window to the safety pad below, my strength failed. The roof collapsed, crushing the void where I stood and shattering my soul again. I realized then that in this glitched reality, even human love and sacrifice are distorted into nightmares. My attempt to help was an act of evil in their eyes, and I will forever be trapped in this hole of misunderstanding, a lonely ghost in the ruins of Ohio. The collapse did not bring death, only the crushing of the spatial shell that defined my presence, so I drifted back into the network of shadows, the image of Tom's terrified eyes haunting me. I gave 15 years to Engine 3, believing I was a bringer of hope, but this reality turned me into a monster to the people I loved most. I feel a horrifying assimilation taking place, where the heat of hell is now my breath, and the darkness behind the cracks is my flesh. Around me, the other victims like the boy from the highway and Bill Kinsley are repeating their meaningless loops. They reach out from walls not to kill, but to warn, yet their calls are bent into murderous glitches. I see the next generation of firefighters taking our places in Athens, their trucks more advanced but the spatial cracks remain. I decided to stop trying to physically intervene and instead retreated to the deepest hole of this void, using my last humanity for a mental leap. I compressed all my memories and sent a message back through time to my past self, sitting at that desk at 3 in the morning. I used the flickering electricity and the heat of the wallpaper to plant a paranoia that would force him to finish this confession before the wall opened. Now, as I merge with the shadows of Ohio, the loop is closed. The silence of the night is a curtain for a meat grinder. I only hope you who hear this stay cold and skeptical. Your brick house is not a fortress, it is an empty box hiding an unexplainable evil. Fire has rules, but the darkness in Ohio does not, so the warning is given, and the loop is sealed tightly. We are here, just behind the drywall, listening to your heart and waiting for the structure to weaken enough to pull you into the eternal void that I continue to watch from the void as humanity builds more fragile boxes, high-rise apartments and suburbs that provide ideal homes for evil entities as the cracks are spreading like a disease across Ohio. Like when I once floated in a new apartment in Athens, watching a young family. Their 5-year-old boy saw the hairline crack in the wall and heard the clawing of shattered souls, but the adults were blind. I was forced by the system to reach out and touch his cheek with the heat of hell while he slept. I cried with lava from my empty sockets, unable to protect him. On Route 33, I see new trucks rushing to accidents where dozens of shadows in firefighter gear now stand on the bridge watching. The glitch has grown so large that past, present, and future are overlapping in a mad mess. Even the stations are not safe. I hide behind their lockers and hear them breathe. I tried to warn them, but my voice became an alarm that woke them in confusion. We are becoming the air of Ohio, waiting for the physical world to rot so we can pull everyone into the cold void. Every crack and every unexplained cold breeze is our signal, so do not turn on the lights, as they only show the surface. When the room gets hot, my hand is already close to taking you into eternity that the evil is now swallowing the natural world, like in the Wayne National Forest. A fire broke out that was not physical fire but a tearing of the membrane. Ancient trees were not burning but dissolving into digital-like noise, and the smoke smelled of rot and electrical ozone. The new Engine 3 arrived, but their water turned to black ash when it hit the anomaly. The sky cracked to reveal cosmic machines and red eyes watching from above. A boy in a helmet with my old number was being sucked into the void. I could not watch another generation fall, so I threw my ash body into the crack, using my shadow arms to block the mouth of the void. It was a pain worse than any fire, but it gave them time to pull the boy to safety. The crack slammed shut and threw me back into the dark. I felt a strange peace because I had fulfilled my mission as a firefighter one last time. But waking up back on my floor at 4 in the morning, I realized the entities did not want my body. They wanted to steal my mind and make me live through the monster's future so I would give up. I am now a hollow shell who cut off my old friends because they will never understand that their brick homes are just traps. We live on a torn membrane, and I sit in my corner and hear them whisper through the gypsum board. My story may be called madness, but it is the final warning to watch the dark spaces in your home that I decided to fight back with the physics humans are proud of, measuring my 85 square meter apartment and finding that 6 square meters had vanished into the wall. The glitch was eating my home like a tumor, so I drilled a hole into the wall and felt a cold wind from the hawking warehouse. Looking through the hole, I saw a red eye looking back. The voice of Tom Vance whispered that it was cold and they needed a fire. I realized they wanted me to use my firefighter instincts to burn the apartment and open the door to hell. I cut the power to my home and sat in the dark. The voices changed to the boy from the highway and Sarah Jenkins, begging for fire. I used my bare palm to plug the hole, and the heat seared me like a red-hot iron. I refused to move, becoming a lonely gatekeeper suffering the fire to keep the void away from the world. The pain is constant, the floor feels like water, and the wall vibrates with the pressure of 1,000,000 tons. A distorted siren of Engine 3 wails outside, while the world outside is a purple sky of ruins. I saw myself in the Nelsonville fire looking at me through the closet. I am a biological key holding the world together, my sweat and blood merging with the wall to strengthen the barrier. My arm is now part of the wall, and I hear Sarah's voice screaming in a chorus of pain. My apartment is dissolving into digital smears, and I heard Tom and Marcus break down my door, but they found an empty room. I am the wall they are touching, and a replacement version of me walked out of the shadows to take my place in the world. I am now part of the smoke, a monster with a hero's heart. David Mitchell's journey ends in the silence of a broken reality. It is a story of courage and sacrifice, but also a reminder that reality is fragile, so value your peace and connections, staying alert and full of love so you do not fall into the shadows. If you feel a chill after hearing this, share your thoughts. Subscribe to our channel for more stories of the glitched reality, as your support keeps us creating. We wish you health and happiness with your loved ones, and bid you goodbye until the next video.